Wes Moore, my friend and the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, one of the largest anti-poverty organizations in the country. Wes is a Rhodes Scholar. He's an Army combat veteran and a New York Times best-selling author. You are putting together this amazing fund aimed at organizations led by people of color. But tell me what's behind it and what your aspirations are for that.
Yeah, so we're incredibly excited about this, and it really is just going to be a fund where we're going to elevate nonprofit leaders of color who share Robin Hood's mission of increasing mobility from poverty. And the real big mission and the motivation behind it is when you look at the disparities that exist right now. So for example, in our catchment area for Robin Hood, about 80% of the people, of the 2 million people living in poverty, are people of color. But when you look at the organizations that are working in that space, over the past 2 decades, only about 10% of all philanthropic dollars have actually gone to organizations that are led by people of color. And so we see this as a way of impacting a direct problem right now, but in addition to that, creating a pipeline of leadership that, as we're really recrafting and rethinking the entire social service sector because of COVID-19, that this is going to be an important platform to be able to do it. So I'm thrilled about this initiative and about the momentum behind it.
To us about sort of the disproportionate impact that COVID's had on low-income communities.
When we look at the economic and the health implications of COVID, it's been absolutely staggering, particularly on communities of color, because we have had these kind of twin crises that have existed that actually expose the very same truth in many ways, right? You saw the impact of COVID-19. And we got this very unneeded reminder of inequitable policing in different communities, right? But the truth is that when you really pull it back, you realize that the singular truth that both those things show is the role that race has played. We're talking about 23% of all people who have lost their job due to COVID-19 were people who were living in poverty before COVID-19. So i.e. the working poor, people who were working jobs, in many cases multiple jobs, and still living below the poverty line. And so this thing has had disastrous impacts on communities and families that were already struggling beforehand and have just now found it to be that much more difficult to be able to make it through.
Wes, let's pivot a little bit and talk about police reform and violence. The New York Times ran a story the other day. It cited 70 deaths of people that were all saying the same 3 words: I can't breathe. And so we've gotten to this point where so many of us say this is unacceptable, what's going on? And then the question is, what are we going to do about it?
We actually have not just the nation, but the world who are understanding that what has been screamed about for so long, this is not hyperbole. It's not exaggeration. It's not making stuff up.
Right.
It's the fact that the pitch of a police siren sounds different depending on what neighborhood you live in. And policing is not equally done. If things that are happening in poor communities, and oftentimes poor Black and brown communities, if they were happening in wealthy communities, that officer would not even make it back to the precinct. Their captain or their major would meet them on the street and say, your badge and your gun, you're done. And so when we're talking about this idea of a defunding of a police, it's basically asking about a reevaluation of what exactly we're asking police to do. And so if we're asking police to do everything from a mental health check to treating someone who is ODing to taking care of a kid who's using firecrackers, and then basically saying, and by the way, police, your job is to do all of that. It's not just unfair, it's actually a pretty bad use of resources. I mean, I'm a big believer in this idea that budgets are moral documents.
Right.
And you know, if I showed you what I spend my money on every month, you could probably get a clear understanding or a clear belief of saying, like, what is important to you? And I think our governmental budget should be the exact same thing. When we have a $41 million budget for the Department of Health, everything that falls in the Department of Health, and a $509 million budget for policing, when the budget for the NYPD is $6 billion, this forces us to have a very real conversation.
I'm going to shift gears. What's the advice you would offer both college graduates or people out of work looking for a job or making a change in their career?
I think that the advice that I would give is right now, this nation and this world is really trying to define itself. I remember when I graduated from college. I graduated from college on May 11 of 2001. I had no idea when I walked here. I thought I had it all figured out as to what I wanted to do next. And I had no idea that in 4 months, the world would change. I realized at that point that as the world was going to change, the question that I then had was I actually going to be a part of it? Or was I just simply going to let the world continue to spin without my measures of fingerprints that are then put on it? And so the thing that I would ask people in this time and in this moment is every system that you relied on or thought about is getting rethought. And frankly, the people who are doing the rethinking and the people who are doing the shaping are no more competent or no more certain than you are, because they're all still trying to figure it out too. And so if that's the case, then why not actually try to be an active part of it?
How has the role of the CEO changed today than a year or two ago?
People oftentimes when they think of CEOs, they're like, it's the person standing there making the decisions and da da da. And they're still like, as a CEO, the buck stops with you, right? I mean, you have to be the one who is accountable for everything that happens within an organization, and you have to be responsible for it, and you have to be okay with that. But I think that the role of CEO also, it should almost now be written in the description, is you also have to become the best listener in your organization. Where people thought that before CEOs don't have to listen, they just make the decisions and so on and so forth. Now, if you aren't the best listener in your organization, not only will your organization falter, but you as a leader will too.
Put it in perspective for us here. I mean, what do you expect in November? What do you think is required to have some hope of unifying the country? Or is that unrealistic?
No, I think it's not only realistic, it's going to be a prerequisite. And I think that for a few different reasons. You know, one, this idea that an election's in the bag. The election's still in 4 months. And where were we 4 months ago, right? 4 months ago, we would be having this conversation in person. 4 months ago, the world was in a completely different place. And so the idea that we're somehow now able to predict what the world is going to be like in 4 months, I'm wondering, what crystal ball do you have that I just haven't seen before? And one thing I will say to people who somehow think that this election is in the bag, do you know who is enthusiastic about their candidate right now? Truthfully, it's supporters of Donald Trump. They are enthusiastic about going out and getting a second term. So my point is this: do not think you are going to win by simply saying what it is that you are against. If you do not get a base that is riled up and enthusiastic about putting a person in office, then I can guarantee you the election results you are looking for might not be the election result that you're going to get.
We're going to leave it there, but I'll tell you one candidate who I'm very enthusiastic about: Wes Moore, 2024.